Hello, Megamaniacs. This is Mr. Mega Man Fan, and today on the Homebrew review, we're looking at BLIP Football. Now, this is a game that I am going to freely admit you may have to be of a certain age and a certain mindset to truly appreciate, because it is an attempt to recreate Mattel electronic football on an Atari 2600. Now, what is that and why would anybody want to do that? Two good questions. Here are my answers. First of all, for some of us growing up in the late 1970s and early 1980s, I was born in 74 if that gives you any idea, we didn't all have video game consoles or even home computers. I mean, there was no such thing as cell phones back then. There were just phones that were hung on a wall and had either a touchpad or a rotary dial, right? So we're almost in the dark ages back here. And in those primitive times, pre-home computer, pre-video game console, you could only entertain yourself with electronic toys like Mattel electronic football. The premise is simple enough. You're on offense, the AI of the computer is on defense, and you have a blip on the screen that represents, well, you can assume he's either the quarterback or the running back. Think whatever you want. You got to use your imagination, okay? And they're trying to stop you from advancing, and you can either move up or down or forward. And you have to get around them as best you can. If the dashes on the screen move up, and sometimes you can lure them up by moving up yourself, then you can run down and around them. Or if one of the defenders moves a couple of lines ahead of the other defenders, then you can go through them like you're weaving through the defense like a great running back would do. And eventually, if you get enough clicks down the screen, you can assume the lines on the screen are like 10-yard markers, and it wraps around when you get to one side. So if you're going to the left, you come back at the right side and continue going left. Or if you're coming from the left and going right, you wrap back around to the left and keep going right. So whatever way you're going, if you run enough yards, eventually you get to the end zone and you hear da-da-da-da-da-da, touchdown. Of course, you hear a very electronic, not even synthesis version, not even samples, just bleeps, bloops, and noises is all you'd hear. And if you grew up playing one of these plastic bricks with LED lights, then Blip Football for Atari 2600 / Atari VCS will be fondly nostalgic for you. And if not, then this may be so primitive that you would ask yourself why you'd even bother. But I think it's an interesting proof of concept because as underpowered as the Atari VCS was, you could still emulate things with it. You could actually emulate an LED electronic football game with this system. It's a very surprising thing to me that nobody actually tried to do that back in the day, because those handheld systems had some real value for kids with limited money and limited entertainment choices. So even if you got an Atari VCS and your parents could afford it, you might still want to play that football game that you remembered borrowing from your friend or passing back and forth to take turns with it. So it would be fun to have a cartridge you could put into your Atari VCS to play electronic football. Honestly, this game is probably better than most of the actual football games that came out on VCS back in the day. Blip Football for Atari 2600, available at AtariAge.com. I highly recommend you check it out if you remember playing this when you were a kid.